Hello everyone, I'm Gaming, and in today's video we are going to be talking about how to find your main role. We're going to be talking about the jobs of each one, kind of go a little bit in depth, and maybe even if you're an Overwatch 2 veteran, you'll learn something. But if you guys want to be guaranteed to learn a bunch of stuff, then you need to check out the GameLeap website. Over there we have top level coaches, including myself, creating the best, most highly informative guides you will ever see. No matter what you struggle with in Overwatch, you will be able to find a solution to it, and we've already helped a bunch of people reach new peak ranks. So click the link in the description, pick yourself up a membership, and start to improve today. But okay, jumping into things, let's start everything off with tank, a role which all teams must play around. As the tank, you are generally the center of attention, as you have the biggest hitbox, the highest health pool, and usually the most fight dictating abilities. With the kind of damage that can be output by an Overwatch tank, it sometimes doesn't even really feel like you're playing tank. But once you learn to master each type of tank in this role, you will certainly feel and act like a raid boss. Now first things first, we must explain the different types of tanks. Not all tanks are made equally, some having more health, some with more mobility, some strong from close and some from far. So we will split these up into 3 different sections of tank: the dive tank, the brawl tank, and the poke tank. As a dive tank, you will be looking to go in with your team or even alone depending on which one you are playing and the situation. These tanks include Winston, D.Va, who is more of a defensive diving option, Wrecking Ball, and Doomfist. And with each of these playing so extremely differently, there's no wonder why Overwatch is such a complicated game. On dive compositions, you will be dictating the pace of the game, making sure you have someone set up to follow each of your engages, and you being who takes the brunt of the force of the enemy team, you likely won't be outputting too much damage. However, you have the abilities that can stun, mitigate damage, and even boot people up and down, left and right, stuff like that, meaning you have great setup for your team. Next up we have the brawl tanks, and there's quite a few. As a brawl tank, you can assume that you want to get up close and personal with the enemy team. Some brawl tanks have better survivability abilities to help their team live, better shields, or higher damage, making it easier to find picks single-handedly. Brawl tanks include Reinhardt, Orisa, Ramattra, Junker Queen, and even Zarya. As a brawl tank, you want to play to your tank's strengths, as your playstyle should be defined by the tank you are playing. For example, on Orisa, you almost always want to be extremely aggressive with your abilities, as your extreme survivability allows you to take immense pressure off of your team. Learning each and every playstyle can be very tricky and is certainly something for another video, but now let's talk about some poke tanks. And these poke tanks, while there are few, can be considerably strong. We can classify Sigma, Roadhog, and even sometimes D.Va as poke tanks. These are great when playing into longer range compositions or playing versus full brawl comps, where you can apply as much damage as possible before they even get to you. D.Va is great for this, particularly for brawl tanks that lack mobility. Therefore, you can sit on high ground and poke them for free, dealing surprising amounts of damage. The playstyle on each of these poking tanks are very unique. As mentioned, D.Va wants to sit on high grounds, poking away her enemies and forcing out resources. But Sigma and Roadhog don't have that option. Roadhog must play basically alone, being an anchor for his team, looking to play exclusively around his hook cooldown for one-shots onto enemies. And Sigma must be sitting in front of his enemy to put out great AoE damage from afar. But now that we have a great understanding of the tank role and how to play each subcategory, let's move into the DPS. As a DPS player, you are usually the carry. You can generally output the most damage on the shortest amount of time and have the highest potential for picking off enemies at random. This is an extremely competitive role, as you can imagine. Everyone fights and starves to be the absolute best, with some heroes being even more competitive, such as Tracer and Widowmaker, 2 very defining picks. But again, let's talk about the subcategories within this role. We have hit scans, who look to output great damage from afar. We have the utility DPS, who can help their team via other methods and damage to enemies. And we have the projectile DPS. There are some other categories, but to explain it as simply as possible, we are just going to stick to these. Starting off with hit scan, your main objective is to output great damage from afar. The more consistent damage you can put out, the more value you are gaining. These picks can include Soldier, Widow, Cassidy, Ashe, and some more that can be kind of a hybrid between projectile and hit scan, such as Sojourn. Each of these play extremely different. Soldier being a pick that can rotate throughout the map very well, as his speed gives him massive edge against other picks such as Cassidy that may hope to do the same. But Widow wants to sit far, far away and open sightline positions to one-shot headshots on enemy backlines. Everything else in between is more of a playstyle changer, but not a large enough one for us to delve too deep into it here. Now, the utility role can be the most fun, as you help your team do things otherwise impossible, such as teleporting mobile compositions to places they otherwise wouldn't be able to get to, or scout targets 100 times easier. These include Torbjorn, Symmetra, and Sombra. The most meta of these being Sombra, generally, as she will always be playable in some game or another. Torb and Symmetra are extremely niche picks and must be brought out with caution. Sombra can go invisible for as long as she likes, sitting behind enemy backlines, pinging information to her team. Torb has a turret that can protect from enemy flankers, and Symmetra, as mentioned before, has a teleporter that is extremely viable on some maps and completely useless on others. Moving into the projectile DPS though, you may realize we haven't mentioned Tracer, as she doesn't really fit into the hit scan role and she won't be mentioned as a projectile DPS either. She isn't projectile. She is just like Reaper, fit into their own little box of picks, but we again aren't going to be diving too deep into those here. Projectile DPS picks include Hanzo, Pharah, Echo, and Genji. Each of the projectile DPS again is extremely different from one another. Genji is a flanker who wants to get up close and personal. Hanzo is a sniper that can give information to his team as he looks to one-shot headshot from afar. And then you have Pharah and Echo. They're the only flying DPS in the game and can absolutely be brutal to play against when they have a Mercy by their side. The playstyle for each is extremely unique, and we recommend trying out each of them to figure out which playstyle you enjoy the most, as there are many streamers that find each of these too fun to not one trick. But now finally moving into the support role, the role that everyone wants to avoid playing regardless of how satisfying carrying on it can be. Supports can do so much more than just healing in Overwatch, as you can make your team basically invincible from 1 second to a full 5 seconds at a time. Breaking down this role into more than 2 subsections will be tricky, which is why we will stick to a traditional tournament split of main support and flex support. There is a common misconception that the main support means higher healing output. In the lower ranked levels of play, that's how this is, but the role actually consists of healers without great healing options compared to their counterparts. This role consists of playing Lucio, Mercy, Brig, and sometimes Ana/Baptiste. That will depend on the map though. Your job as a main support is to use the lack of brain cell it requires to play these simpler heroes. And then you can give information to your team on the enemies, what ultimates they may have coming up, as well as play as more of a bait/utility to your team. The flex support role is where it gets kind of interesting. It consists of healers such as Baptiste, Ana, Zenyatta, Moira, and Kiriko. These supports are almost all very high healing output supports, but all other than one, being Moira, having great utility. The great thing about each of these flex supports is that they generally work well with each main support, even Zenyatta with Mercy to a degree. One of the most crucial skills as a support is to pick what works best for your team, as Overwatch 2 is actually very support defining, meaning the game can be won and lost by the quality of the supports. This role can have the greatest impact when choosing the correct support to go with your team composition, as Ana with a ball comp can feel useless, but with a monkey composition, for example, it can be extraordinarily powerful. Supports in Overwatch 2 are usually the ones who get their ultimate fastest, unless in the case of an extremely fast team fight, and from ultimates that make your team near invincible to a 1.5 time damage multipliers and abilities that make your team run 2 times faster, and being able to deny all healing. Talking about all the things supports can do in a game would be a whole different video in itself. But at the end of the day, figuring out what role you want to play comes down to the playstyle you enjoy. Whether you want to be a full carry for your team to rely on, or the one who sets up the plays, or even the backbone that keeps everyone at tip-top shape while attempting to make one of the worst jobs in the world for the enemy supports. We strongly suggest trying out each and every role and figuring out which one you enjoy the most. But if you guys already have a main role, let me know what it is in the comments down below. And if you guys want to stay up to date with the latest, greatest Overwatch tips, tricks, and news, don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks all for watching. Once again, I made Second Gaming, and I'll see you guys in the next one.